Imagine standing in front of a door, knocking again and again, hoping someone will open it and invite you in. The more you knock, the more desperate you feel, like your worth is measured by how much someone acknowledges your presence. But what if I told you that the very act of begging, whether for attention, for love, or even for simple acknowledgement, diminishes your value? The truth is, when we beg, we're giving our power away, letting someone else control our emotions, and basing our self-worth on their response. Begging, in its many forms, is not just a plea to others, it's a compromise of our dignity. And the message is clear: don't beg. When we beg, we put ourselves in a position that is beneath us. Think about it every time we ask, plead, or push for something from someone else. We are essentially saying, I don't feel that I'm worthy enough to have this without your validation. It's like saying, without you, I can't feel complete. But you see, true strength lies in knowing that our value is not up for negotiation. It's set by us, within us, unshakable by anyone else's opinions or responses. Consider the times you might have begged for someone's time, maybe for a friend to include you in their plans, or a partner to show you more affection. Each moment of begging subtly chips away at your self-respect. Think about the energy it takes, the way it drains you emotionally. You find yourself waiting, hoping, checking for a reply, checking for a sign. And in that process, you lose pieces of yourself. Because every second you spend begging is a second not spent focusing on your own growth, your own happiness, your own life. And life is too precious to waste on a door that won't open for you, will it? The power we seek in relationships, in our jobs, and in our friendships comes from respect, not desperation. When you beg, you not only compromise your dignity, but also weaken the bond between you and the other person. They might give in, respond, or give you a piece of what you're asking for, but it doesn't feel the same, does it? When we beg, we shift the energy of the relationship. Instead of it being balanced, it becomes lopsided, where one person holds the power and the other is left hoping, pleading, and waiting. But that is not how meaningful connections are built. True relationships, true connections are mutual. They thrive when both people willingly give, when there's no need to plead or beg. Begging tells the other person that you don't feel whole on your own, that you're willing to shrink yourself just to keep them in your life. But real strength, the kind that lasts, the kind that empowers, comes from knowing that you are whole, that you are whole, that you are enough, and that your value doesn't depend on anyone else. Now let's look at how this mindset shift can transform not just relationships, but every area of your life. In the workplace, for instance, begging for recognition or constantly seeking validation from your boss or colleagues can affect how you're viewed. Imagine the difference between an employee who seeks constant approval and one who is confident, secure, and self-motivated. The latter is the one people respect. They're the ones who get noticed, not because they begged for it, but because they stood in their power, trusted their skills, and delivered results without needing applause at every turn. The same applies to your friendships and your personal growth. Think about the energy you save, the freedom you gain, when you no longer feel the need to beg for inclusion, for validation, or for approval. By focusing on what brings you joy, what helps you grow, you begin to radiate confidence and independence. And ironically, it's in this very state, when you no longer feel the need to beg, that people are naturally drawn to you. They sense that you're whole within yourself, that you don't need anything from them to feel complete. That kind of presence is powerful, magnetic, and respected. Begging, then, isn't just a momentary action. It's a habit that can seep into our mindset, our self-image, and even our future. If we get used to begging, it becomes a pattern, and soon we find ourselves constantly looking to others to feel worthy. But let's decide here and now that we're breaking that cycle, that we're reclaiming our value and our power. So how do we do this? It starts with a decision, a mindset shift that tells you I'm enough. My value doesn't depend on anyone else's acknowledgement. Instead of focusing on what others can give you, focus on what you bring to the table. Take stock of your strengths, your values, your uniqueness. Understand that what you offer is valuable, and that if someone doesn't see it, it doesn't mean you are lacking. It simply means they are not the right fit for your journey. And if ever you find yourself in a moment where you're tempted to beg, maybe, for someone's time, their response, or their approval, take a breath and step back. Remember your worth, remember your value, and remind yourself that you do not need to seek validation from anyone. Instead of asking or begging, choose to invest that energy in yourself. Build your skills, pursue your passions, connect with those who genuinely value you without you having to prove yourself. When you refuse to beg, you're telling the world and yourself that you're enough as you are. You're embracing your own worth and inviting only those who respect it to be part of your life. And when you do this, you'll find that the relationships, opportunities, and experiences that come into your life are ones that genuinely belong there, ones that uplift, respect, and appreciate you for who you truly are. Don't beg. Stand tall in who you are and let your own worth be the foundation on which you build everything else. When we chase something, whether it's people, goals, or validation from the world, we often find ourselves running toward an image or ideal that doesn't really fulfill us. The act of chasing is rooted in a belief that what we want or need is outside of us, something distant, something we have to work tirelessly to grasp. But in reality, the most meaningful things in life don't require us to chase. They're drawn to us naturally when we're in alignment with our true selves, when we're at peace with who we are. So instead of chasing, what if we cultivated a sense of inner peace? A sense of fulfillment that doesn't depend on external validation. When we chase people, we're not just running toward them, we're also running away from ourselves. We're saying in a way that who we are right now isn't enough, that we need someone else to complete us or make us whole. But here's the truth: no person, no relationship, no amount of approval can fill a void within us. Chasing others, whether it's in friendship, romance, or even in professional settings, often leads to disappointment, because it places our happiness in the hands of someone else. It's a signal to ourselves that we believe we lack something essential. But the reality is, everything we need to feel complete is already within us. Imagine a situation where you're constantly chasing someone's attention. You're calling them, texting them, checking in just to feel that little rush of validation when they respond. But what does this actually do for your sense of self? Every time you chase, you're draining your energy, investing time and emotion into something outside yourself, into someone who may or may not value you the same way. And when we give away our energy like that, piece by piece, we're left feeling empty, wondering why we feel so exhausted. The truth is, what we truly want isn't in the chase, it's in the inner contentment that comes when we know we're enough as we are. Think of how different life would feel if we stopped chasing others. If instead we invested that energy in becoming the best versions of ourselves, when we focus on our own growth, when we nurture our passions and strengths, we naturally become magnetic. People, opportunities, relationships, all of these things are drawn to us not because we're running after them, but because we've become a source of value and authenticity. This doesn't mean we don't seek meaningful connections or set ambitious goals, but we pursue them from a place of inner peace, not from desperation or lack. Consider the concept of abundance in nature. A flower doesn't chase bees. It simply grows, nurtures itself, and blossoms. Its fragrance, its colors, its vibrancy, they naturally attract what it needs. The same principle applies to us. When we grow, when we nurture our own qualities, we attract what's aligned with who we are. Chasing, in contrast, often leads us toward things that don't resonate with us, things that are out of sync with our values. When we chase, we risk compromising our authenticity, molding ourselves to fit into places and relationships that aren't truly meant for us. And let's think about chasing in the context of our goals and aspirations. There's a difference between pursuing our dreams with purpose and clarity and endlessly chasing after success for the sake of validation. When we chase success, we often attach our worth to achievements and outcomes. We measure ourselves based on what we accomplish, and if we fall short, we feel inadequate. But when we pursue our goals from a place of self-worth, we're motivated not by external markers of success, but by an internal drive to grow, to improve, to express our true potential. This shift allows us to enjoy the journey, to find fulfillment in the process, rather than constantly pushing toward a distant finish line. The reality is, what is meant for us will come to us without us having to sacrifice our peace or compromise who we are. This doesn't mean we sit back passively, it means we're active participants in our lives. But we're not running ourselves ragged trying to make things happen. We're taking inspired actions aligned with our values, our passions, and our purpose. And when we do this, we open the door for what's truly meant for us to arrive. When we stop chasing, we free ourselves from unnecessary pressure. We release the need to control outcomes and instead trust that what's meant for us will find its way into our lives. This mindset not only brings more peace, but also a deeper sense of freedom. We're no longer bound by the opinions or validation of others. We're no longer racing to prove ourselves. We're simply being who we are, and in doing so, we naturally attract people and opportunities that resonate with our true selves. So the next time you feel the urge to chase, whether it's someone's approval, attention, or even a goal that feels just out of reach, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, am I moving toward this from a place of self-worth and worth and authenticity, or am I chasing it because I feel incomplete without it? If the answer is rooted in lack or insecurity, it's a sign to turn inward. It's a chance to reconnect with your values, your strengths, and your unique qualities. By focusing on becoming the best version of yourself, you won't need to chase anything. You'll simply attract what's in alignment with who you are. The world will respond to you based on how you see yourself. If you believe you're enough, if you believe you're worthy, that energy becomes a beacon. You no longer need to seek out validation or approval from others, you embody it. And in doing so, you will find that what truly belongs in your life will come to you effortlessly. Don't chase. Trust that by honoring yourself, by nurturing your own growth, you'll attract everything you need. Writing to someone when there's no real need can sometimes feel like a small thing. But the truth is, it often holds a deeper meaning. Writing, especially when we initiate, reaches out and seeks some sort of response. It's as if we're hoping for validation or connection, or maybe we're trying to rekindle something that was lost. But what does it mean when we're constantly the ones starting the conversation? When we're the ones sending those texts, those messages trying to bridge a gap that someone else isn't meeting us halfway on? It becomes not just about communication, but about what lies beneath that desire to write, to express, to reach out. Every message we send, every note or text, is an investment of energy. And when we're giving that energy away without anything in return, it's like pouring water into a bucket with a hole at the bottom. Over time, that effort drains us. It leaves us feeling empty, wondering if our words hold any weight or if we're even being heard. The more we write, the more we try to reach out, the more we might feel like we're pushing against a closed door. And with every unanswered message or response that feels half-hearted, we can start to feel our own worth slipping, questioning if there's something lacking within us. But let's pause here, because that feeling, that experience, isn't a reflection of our worth, but of the misalignment between the connection we're seeking and the reality of the relationship on the other end. Let's consider what it would feel like to stop initiating, to stop reaching out when it feels forced or one-sided. What if, instead of writing, we allowed ourselves to sit with the silence, to let the absence of communication be its own form of clarity? When we write to someone and they don't respond in kind, they're giving us an answer, just not the one we may want to hear. The lack of engagement from their side is a clear message this relationship, this communication, is not a priority for them. And that realization, though it may sting, is powerful. It's a signal that perhaps our energy is better spent elsewhere, that there's space to cultivate relationships where the interest, the connection, is mutual and freely given. Choosing not to write, to step back from that urge to reach out, can be an act of self-respect. It's a way of saying, I deserve relationships where I don't have to chase or convince anyone to communicate with me. By holding back, we create space in our lives for people who are genuinely interested, who will reach out to us, who will value our presence without prompting. And when those people arrive, the connection will feel effortless, natural, without the need to constantly initiate or wonder where we stand. The truth is, real relationships don't require us to work this hard just to keep the lines open. They flow, they nourish us, and they give us energy rather than drain it. Think about the energy shift that happens when we stop writing. When we stop pouring into connections that don't reciprocate, suddenly there's a sense of liberation. There's space in our minds and our hearts, space that was once occupied by worry, doubt, and waiting. This space can be filled with self-discovery, with reflection, with the freedom to invest in ourselves. Instead of pouring our thoughts, our emotions, our words into someone who may not value them, we can redirect that energy inward. We can focus on growth, on nurturing our own interests, our passions, our dreams. It's not always easy to let go of that urge to reach out, to stop ourselves from writing to someone we care about or feel attached to. But sometimes love or connection isn't about holding on tightly, it's about letting go. It's about trusting that if the connection is real, it will remain even in the absence of constant contact. And if it fades, then it was never strong enough to begin with. Sometimes in that space of silence, we find out who truly values us and who doesn't. And that knowledge, though it may come with a certain sadness, is a gift. It gives us the clarity to move forward, to direct our energy toward connections that truly matter. When we stop writing, we're making a statement, not just to others, but to ourselves. We're saying, I'm enough as I am. I don't need to push or prove my worth to anyone. We're letting our actions, or in this case, our lack of action, speak volumes. And this can be incredibly powerful. It frees us from the need to be validated by anyone outside ourselves. It shifts our focus from trying to manage relationships to simply being, living, and allowing things to unfold naturally. By choosing not to write, we're no longer bound by the expectations or reactions of others. We're giving ourselves permission to step back and observe, to see who reaches out when we don't, to see which relationships are truly mutual and which ones are only held together by our efforts. This is a profound shift. It allows us to engage with life, with relationships, from a place of strength rather than neediness. We're no longer writing to be seen or heard by someone who isn't truly listening. We're stepping into the power of silence, the power of patience, and the confidence that we are worthy of genuine, reciprocal relationships. Let's remember, too, that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. When we refrain from writing, from pushing for that interaction, it's not an act of giving up, it's an act of strength. It's recognizing that we don't need to hold anyone in our lives against their will, that those who truly value us will make the effort, will step forward, will show up. It's a beautiful thing to know that we don't have to beg for anyone's attention, that we don't have to chase or constantly reach out. We can trust that by respecting ourselves enough to let go, we'll attract the kind of relationships that don't require us to sacrifice our peace. So, as we step back from the need to write, to reach out, we step into a new kind of freedom. We allow ourselves to be present in our own lives without the constant pull of expectation or the need for someone else's approval. We choose to invest in ourselves, to fill that space with our own dreams, passions, and the things that truly matter to us. In doing so, we become more grounded, more confident, and ultimately more fulfilled. And this is the true beauty of letting go of the need to write, to chase, to convince anyone to see our worth. We're reclaiming our own power, our own sense of peace, and that in the end is far more rewarding than any response we might have received. Choosing not to write doesn't mean we don't care or don't value others. It simply means we value ourselves enough to honor our own energy, to guard our peace, and to trust that what is meant for us will come to us without needing to push or prove. We're no longer in the business of convincing anyone to stay in our lives. We're here to grow, to flourish, and to attract the kind of connections that honor who we truly are. There's a certain freedom, a liberation in stepping back from the need to pick up the phone and call someone just to remind them that we're here. Many of us have been there, where we call because we want that reassurance, that reminder that there's a connection. But what if I told you that true connections, real bonds, don't need constant calls or constant updates to thrive? They don't need us to check in day after day, desperately hoping that by putting in that effort, we're building something real. Sometimes it's in the silence, in the absence of that constant communication, that we discover who is truly there for us. You see, when we stop calling, we give others the opportunity to call us if they truly value that connection. We're so used to making sure everyone around us feels our presence. We call because we care. We call because we're invested. But what happens when we pause? When we allow ourselves to breathe and wait, it can feel strange, maybe even a little unsettling, because we're so used to being the ones to initiate. But the beauty of stepping back is that it creates space for the truth to rise to the surface. We get to see who's willing to fill that space, who's willing to reach out, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to. Think about the energy we put into every phone call, every time we reach out first. When it's always us making that effort, there's a subtle but profound message being sent. We're signaling that this relationship, this connection depends on us. And while that might feel comforting, there's something freeing about realizing that we don't have to carry the weight of maintaining every connection we hold dear. When we stop calling, we shift that dynamic. We tell ourselves, if this person values me, they'll make the effort. 2, we stop overextending ourselves for people who might not be giving us the same energy in return. This isn't about playing games, it's about honoring ourselves, respecting our energy, and inviting relationships that are truly mutual. When we constantly call, we sometimes end up filling the silence that might reveal something essential about the relationship. That silence, as uncomfortable as it can be, often holds clarity. It can show us who's genuinely present, who misses us enough to reach out, who values us enough to make the effort. And let me tell you, that's one of the most empowering realizations, to see who's truly there when you stop initiating. Now, this doesn't mean we should cut people off or stop caring. It's not about neglecting connections that matter, but there's a big difference between a relationship that naturally flows and one that relies on us to keep it alive. Our real relationships don't require us to constantly be the one making the first move. And when we find ourselves in a cycle of calling, of chasing, of keeping that line open, it might be time to step back and reevaluate. It's okay to let that phone stay silent, to leave room for someone else to step forward. When we stop calling, we're letting go of that need to manage, to control, or to make sure that someone else is thinking of us. We're choosing instead to focus that energy on ourselves, on the things that fill us up. And here's the beautiful irony: when we stop calling, we often end up attracting the kinds of relationships that don't need us to work so hard. We find people who match our energy, who show up without needing reminders, who value us enough to reach out on their own. This shift from calling others to waiting for them to call us is more than just a change in behavior. It's a shift in mindset. We begin to see our time, our energy, and our presence as something valuable, something that doesn't need to be given away freely to anyone who isn't willing to meet us halfway. We become more selective, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. We start to understand that the right people will always find a way to stay connected, even if we're not constantly reaching out. And for those who drift away when we stop calling, well, maybe that distance is a sign that our energy is better spent elsewhere. Think about what it would feel like to let go of that pressure to keep calling, to keep making sure the connection is alive. Imagine the weight that lifts off your shoulders when you realize that you're allowed to let go of relationships that don't reciprocate. You're allowed to give yourself permission to wait to let the other person step forward, to see if they're willing to make an effort. This doesn't make you selfish or unkind, it makes you wise. It shows that you're aware of the value of mutual effort, of relationships that aren't one-sided. And here's the truth: the right people, the ones who truly care, will notice when you stop calling. They'll feel that absence, and if the connection is real, they'll reach out, they'll step up. They'll be there. The people who matter won't need you to always be the one initiating. They'll find their own ways to connect, to show you that they value you too. And for those who don't reach out, who don't feel that absence, let them be. Their silence is its own answer. So if you find yourself constantly reaching out, constantly being the one to make the effort, ask yourself why. What would happen if you stopped? If you took a step back and allowed the relationship to unfold naturally, what would that reveal? You might find that some people disappear, and while that can be painful, it's also liberating. It means that you're making room for relationships that don't require you to chase, to constantly call, to prove your worth through your effort alone. When we choose not to call, we're choosing to invest in ourselves. We're giving ourselves the gift of peace, of stillness, and the chance to see who values us without needing to be reminded of our presence. This isn't about abandoning people or becoming distant. It's about creating space for relationships that feel effortless, natural, and deeply fulfilling. We're no longer trying to force connections or prove ourselves through constant communication. We're simply being. And that's a powerful stance to take. Ultimately, by choosing not to call, we're stepping into our own strength. We're learning to trust that we're worthy of relationships where we don't have to keep initiating just to be seen or heard. And in that trust, we find freedom. Freedom from the need to chase, to convince, to hold on. We find the peace that comes from knowing that the right connections will always find a way to stay in our lives without us having to work so hard. So let the phone rest, let the silence speak, and know that you're worthy of relationships that don't require you to always be the one to call.